Okay, welcome everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Joe Moutard, and I'm a voluntarist, anarchist, abolitionist, whatever you want to call it. I kind of came to my path around 2012, which was a few years after I learned I was going to be a dad, and sort of went on a journey of self-exploration and self-improvement, and started asking a couple questions, and lo and behold, wow, abandon the state, that type of thing. But really, who am I? I'm nobody of consequence. I'm not some great billionaire. I have very little in the way of formal education. I don't have a bunch of credentials. I don't have a bunch of government employees who told me that I'm really smart and special and can do all these things. But I still have confidence in the ability of my mind to perceive the facts of reality, to apply logic, to apply reason, and to discern truth from falsehood. I believe I can do that. But that being said, everything I'm going to talk about today is, of course, entirely open for debate. I may be incorrect in some of my positions or assumptions. I may have used fallacious logic. I may not have reasoned properly. The good news is, if one of you can deliver me, or any of you can deliver better reason and evidence to me, I can change my position, and all of you get to witness my growth, and I'll gladly adopt a new position. I'm not passionately wed to any of these things because, above all things, I value truth. I want to figure out what is true and what is not. So what are we going to talk about today? Joe mentioned, and I'm glad that Prof kind of led into it a little bit, and that's capitalism, right? Now, even just saying the word for a lot of people, and I recognize a lot of people here are kind of preaching to the choir. Most of you have economic literacy, but when you speak to most of these people, that should... Am I too far from the mic? Step a little closer. Okay. I feel like I'm like...
That's a lot better.
Is that better? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that. But yeah, so when you walk up to those people and you mention the word capitalism, what happens, right? What do they think of? They see these fat, old, rich white men smoking cigars with snifters of brandy, sitting in a mahogany boardroom on top of a skyscraper while, like, the whole masses are chained to their workstations, drinking putrid water and breathing gray, black-lunged smoke air, right? That's what people see. They see these ultra-rich, and they see everybody starving and dirty and poor and getting victimized and exploited, suicide nets around their chained-up workstations. That's what people think. That's what they see. That's what they're told during their 15,000-hour indoctrination session at a government school, right? That's what we're up against. Now, that being said, I don't care about the word. The word is not what's important. It just so happens that I don't really have a better word. So we're going to stick with capitalism, right? Now, and the funny thing about it is, that mental image that people get is absolutely the image of what happens when you introduce force and coercion into peaceful, voluntary transactions. It's the opposite of what capitalism actually is. Because in reality, economic liberty improves the standard of living for everybody. It's proven time after time after time. If you leave people free, they will trade, they will exchange, they will make things, they will provide things for one another. And that liberty, that economic liberty, provides opportunities for advancement that are otherwise just not possible, and historically have never been for many people, and in some parts of the world still are not. And in fact, every advancement in humanity, everything that gets better, everything that we learn, is only made possible through the acquisition, the allocation, and investment in capital. But before we can defend or we can decry capitalism, right, we have to actually understand, well, what it is. And this is something that most of the severe critics of capitalism often can't really do without resorting to some kind of emotional reaction or logical fallacy. But that preconceived notion, it's not a rational application of what actually is. So what is capitalism, right? It's a system of economic organization based on the acquisition, the allocation, and the investment in capital. It is a naturally emergent pattern of behavior. This is not something that's a centrally organized system that has to be forced on people. This is something that we do by ourselves, by our very nature, just by being around other people. Even being by ourselves, alone, on a desert island, we would still acquire and utilize capital. One of the beauties of this system, though, is that it allows people to meet their own self-interest by meeting the needs and the desires of others. So service to others is how you improve yourself. And it's incentivized that way, by its very nature. That's why it is something that people will gravitate to on their own if left to their own devices. Now, of course, it is predicated on peaceful trade interactions. Trade, of course, does not occur in a voluntary setting unless everybody who's trading benefits. It's also underpinned by the assignment of property rights in scarce resources, or rivalrous goods in economic terms. There's things that only you can own at this one time. Like, for example, he's wearing underwear. I can't wear his underwear with him right now, unless they're really stretchy. But his underwear is a rivalrous good. It is scarce. There's only one pair of underwear that he's... Are you wearing more than one? Okay. But we need to figure out who has the best claim of ownership on that scarce resource. How do we do that? Really, there's basically two ways. There's original appropriation. Either he found them in the state of nature. The Lord made underwear and dropped them into the forest, and CJ found them, right? He's the first one. He would have the best claim over anyone else who comes after. Or contract, which is trade interactions, right? He can grant his claim of ownership to someone else in exchange for whatever he sees fit. That's why this kind of thing, we're all going to encounter each other. We're all going to say, hey, look at this. I want this. Does it belong to somebody else? Does somebody else have a better claim of ownership over it? How do we organize ourselves? So these property rights, these are necessary for peaceful coexistence, for cooperation, for coordinating and collaborating our efforts with others. Now, I mentioned that it's a system of economic organization, right? Capitalism is part of economics. What is economics? Well, economics is a branch of praxeology, right? And anyone who does their Mises work knows praxeology is the study of purposeful human action, right? We're not just randomly, chaotically doing things for no reason, unless you took all that stuff at the fire last night. But when humans act, they have a reason behind what they're doing. We are always acting because we want to improve something. Now, some of us might have bad information going into that. We might actually be making some poor choices and making things worse in result. But we always act trying to make something better, trying to do what we believe is going to add value to our lives. Now, every action that we take, we choose to do something, it carries what we call an opportunity cost. Economics people. That action that you've chosen comes at the opportunity cost of everything else that you didn't do. I'm drinking this water right now. Opportunity cost is I have to stop talking for a second. So that's one of those things to be considered. The opportunity costs are often referred to as what is unseen. In many cases. But how do we determine the best course of action to meet our objectives, to meet those values, right? How do we figure out what the choices? We have all these different things we can do. We have great capabilities. We have these wonderful, wonderful slabs of meat stuck inside our heads that can do all kinds of crazy things. But how do we figure it out? How do we make our choices, right? And market interactions, economics, gives us the vital feedback information of price, profit, and loss. We can see what other people do. We can see what they want based on their actions. When people make profits doing X, we can see that X actually kind of works, and maybe we want to emulate it. When people lose doing X, well, maybe they did it wrong, or maybe it's something that doesn't work. But we at least have that feedback. We can see it, so we can make rational calculations. We can kind of figure out what's going to work for us to meet our own needs and desires. Now, of course, the most primitive form of trade between people is the barter. And everybody engages in barter. You know, I'll give you an apple for your orange, I'll give you a rock for your stick. The big problem is that, of course, with barter, somebody else has to want what you have, and you have to want what they have, otherwise you're not going to trade. It's not going to happen. This is the double coincidence of wants that they refer to in economics. Now, that makes barter relatively limited in its efficiency, right? You're not always going to find somebody that has what you want. You don't want to have to go through these multiple layers of trade to find something that he wants, that he wants, that he wants, and go through all these different people to finally get to the thing that you actually want. Well, when people are all trading together in these marketplaces, right, every single time, no matter where you are, and it can be in many, many forms, but some commodity or commodities always emerge as what we call money, right? These are commodities that people will actually acquire, not for the purpose of actually consuming it. Federal Reserve notes, right? No, you don't pull this stuff up because you want to actually use it. You acquire it just for the purpose of trade, because other people believe in it. And there are certain properties that commodities have that make them more or less suitable for use as money. Traditionally, of course, silver and gold have always fit this bill. Portability, you can actually take it from place to place. Fungibility, I could take an ounce of gold here, and an ounce of gold here. I could switch them, and they're still pretty much, assuming equal purity, but they're still the same, right? They're divisible. An ounce of gold, a pound of gold, a gram, whatever, you can divide it into smaller or larger pieces without taking away from its value. Can't really do that with a lot of things. Like, for example, I heard somebody on their podcast mention a cow, right? You can't really sell half a cow and hope that it's going to keep eating and growing and making baby cows. Doesn't work that way. Now, but that's kind of where the money comes from. And the money takes away that double coincidence of wants. So it allows much, much more efficient trades, which means more frequent trades and better, faster market growth, right? So it's just one of those things that makes our lives a little bit easier. Now, economics as a science does focus specifically on trade interactions, which we mentioned before. Trades are voluntary, right? They have to be, and when they are, they're mutually beneficial. When two people trade, everybody values what they receive more than what they give. That means just by that simple change in resource allocation, you have created more value. That surplus of value that exists after the trade than what was before is what we call profit. And this is the process of actually creating wealth. This is where it comes from. This is how things get better. But of course, value is entirely subjective. Ask somebody who hates chocolate ice cream how much they value a bowl of chocolate ice cream, and it's not very much. They won't eat it. They know it's going to melt. It does nothing for them. They don't want it. Now you ask that little kid over there, right? And they'll go screaming down the street every time they hear music coming from a truck because they know it's got chocolate ice cream. It's of subjective value. Now, and again, that value can be measured any way a person sees fit. It doesn't have to be in a certain commodity, be it a money or a Federal Reserve note or a gold or silver. It could be, some people do things because they want a hug or a handshake or a smile or they like to have friends. Some people do it because they want water that's not from Flynn, you know. But besides just being subjective, the key is with value is that it's not a stationary target. It's always changing. Each person has their values changing. Now think about this. Right now, toilet probably doesn't mean much to you, but you suck down a few drinks, wait a couple hours, like if I keep talking and I make you stay here, all of a sudden that toilet is going to get to be one of the most valuable things that you can have in your life, right? Because at some point, it's going to happen. It's just a question of where. Toilet's a better place. So that's one of those ways where, based on your environment and the changing conditions, your values, your subjective values, are actually going to change. Now, and this is one of the reasons why central planning absolutely can never work. No matter how smart a person is, they may be able to eventually figure out a stationary snapshot of the way things are now and what they should do. But the problem is, us humans, we adapt, we change, we move, and nobody can keep up with making those decisions for others. And of course, with central planning, in particular with economic schemes that don't support property rights, well, you have no price mechanism, right? You have no way of making rational calculations. That's why you look at the models of the USSR where, yeah, they made like a ton of iron and big rockets and everything, but then they never had toilet paper or toothbrushes. You would wait in line for hours. But look at Venezuela right now. Right now, you have this place that is impossibly wealthy in natural resources, and people can't get food. They can't even pump their own oil, which is so readily available. It's amazing, and this is because they don't have that ability to rationally calculate their prices or their economic actions.
They need better leaders.
Yeah, we just got to get the right guy in office, right? And it'll work this time. But of course, that never really happens. And simple fact is, any system that relies on the right person being in office just is bound to fail because the right people don't like it. So the other thing now we have to understand is not just that we're talking about economics, but it's a system of economics based on the allocation, organism. Capital. What is capital, right? What is this thing? Capital is anything that we acquire that's not for trade, but really to facilitate the production, the provision of these goods, these services for others. It's what we get that makes us better able to meet the needs of others. It can be material, it can be immaterial, tangible things. But assuming sanity and competency, right, every human being acquires capital just by their very nature. We start off as this tiny blank slate. We don't know anything. Some of us can barely walk, right? But we learn very quickly. We learn consequences to our actions. We learn to balance. We learn to put food in our face by ourselves. We even learn to use tools to do it. All of these things are capital, right? Knowledge is the ultimate intangible capital good. And you can't stop a person from acquiring it if they want to. They always will. You can certainly distort the manner in which they do it. You can also lock them in a room, spew lies into their head, treat them in an abusive manner for 15,000 hours during childhood, and you can make them not want to learn anymore, but they're still learning from that. You can only really screw it up for them. But the purpose of this capital, like I said, is to increase the efficiency and resource allocation in how we maximize the profit of these trade interactions. How do we make this trade work a little better? And again, that trade could be anything. It could be a good conversation, right? If that's all you want. Maybe you walk up and talk to a guy who has a great podcast and you have this stimulating, wonderful conversation. Well, you've profited from that. You've acquired capital. This is a good thing. Now, what about abuse, right? We always hear about these robber barons, these awful people. Well, robber barons, when you look at them, the only real robbing they did was when they actually got in with the government and founded their foundations, their non-profit foundations, Rockefeller's, Ford Foundation, which, where they got in with the public schooling, where they started to use this state power, this force to really impose their will on others. But in terms of pure business, in all cases, you look, they brought goods to market at lower prices and consistently increasing supply, made things more available to people. They gave people what they wanted, which is how they were able to be successful. Now, what they did after that, not always the greatest things. But the key is free markets are self-regulating because people are incentivized to carry a good reputation. Reputation is, of course, extremely valuable capital, an intangible capital. But if Joe over there likes to go out and strangle puppies and set kittens on fire, you're not going to want to do business with him, right? This is not a person whose model you want to support. You'd have to actually please people. You have to make this a good experience. They have to enjoy dealing with you, or you're not going to want to deal with them. And assuming it's a voluntary interaction, it increases the amount of value that you have to offer somebody before they will actually come near you. I mean, maybe if Joe is giving me 10 pounds of gold, I can look past the occasional strangled puppy, right? But the price goes up. Now, so it's through this way and that we are actually incentivized to work with others and play nice. Don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, right? When you do that, people actually will respect you. Of course, there's always the threat of competition. If Joe is out there strangling puppies and he's making widgets, well, somebody else walks in and says, hey, I also make widgets, and I can do it without strangling puppies. Well, everybody's going to go to the guy that doesn't do that, right? Especially if they're the same price. He might even be able to charge just a little bit more than Joe, and people say, you know what? I don't like puppy strangling, so I'm still going to buy that slightly higher priced widget just because of Joe, right? But that's one of the ways that markets kind of regulate themselves, and you can see it every time. When people are in trade, when they're doing business with one another, they have to maintain the peace because it's efficient, right? Conflict is inefficient. Violence is horribly inefficient in meeting our desired ends. But one of the other tools that people have is, like we mentioned, ostracism. Economic ostracism is the result of a bad reputation where people just don't want to do business with you. If you don't pay for things that you take, if you strangle puppies, if you any of these things, people have the power to ostracize you and say, I'm not going to trade with you because I don't like the things that you do. Or I don't trust that this is going to be a favorable trade interaction for me. You sold this guy a widget and it broke in 2 seconds and you wouldn't replace it. I don't want to buy that, right? That economic ostracism is the key power of free markets and of capitalism specifically. And a lot of people use those terms kind of interchangeably, free market and capitalism. A free market is kind of the overall umbrella of just where people can trade things. Capitalism, the reason we can use them interchangeably is because the capitalism is going to happen no matter what. It's part of the game. It's something we kind of have to do. Not because we're forced to, but because we like making things better. Now, whenever you see these sustained patterns of abuse, those rich old fat white guys sitting in their mahogany boardroom, when you see the teeming masses swimming through garbage, like if anyone looked outside of the Olympic Stadium in Rio, you saw some interesting things. You always see those things And it's only possible through the force of the state, right? Through this imposed will through violence. And of course, as you mentioned, a lot of people say capitalism, and they're talking about the economic system that we have today, the mercantilism, the fascism, the corporatism, right? And, well, let's face it, if you can't really win an argument, you just change the meaning of the words, and then people take your side anyway based on that definition. It's a subversive tactic, and it does work. I don't know if we can take that word back or not. I don't know if capitalism's ever going to be unsullied, but the bottom line is we are going to be capitalists, whether we think we are or not. Everybody is. Now the other thing with capital is it can be used for productive or destructive ends. People can abuse it. People can misuse it. I like to blow things up. I love fireworks. Now, I actually like to put the fireworks in something. Who hasn't put a firecracker in a can to watch it explode, right? This is fun. Now, that is destructive. But you do actually profit from it. You're consuming the can, but you're also getting the value of that happy joy juice that you get when you just blow something up and it's really cool, right? But the other thing you notice is with these, when you get these sustained abuses, these big crushing states, well, these forced interventions, right? This coercion in these trade interactions, it always creates perverse incentives. That is, people are incentivized to do things that they otherwise would not want to do. Most people, if left to their own devices, would not want to give millions of dollars to a senator or a congressman because they're raging douchebags and they piss money away like it's nothing. But because of all of these coercion, this giant state mechanism that we have here, well, doing that gives a lot of businesses a competitive advantage. It's a perverse incentive, which causes a malinvestment or a misallocation of resources, putting things in places where they're not productive, right? But the good news is, for the central planners, as we mentioned, it's not possible because they have no method of rational calculation. We know that humans adapt their behavior. And one of the worst things they can ever do is price controls, which is much of what you see in the Venezuela thing. When they say, this is going to be the price because we want to make sure everyone can afford it, well, all of a sudden, this good is no longer profitable for people to make. A lot of people will hoard, as they call it, or they'll abstain from selling it. And you will end up with a shortage. Now, of course, there's a little more complexity to it than that. But those things are proven time and time again to result in economic destruction. The good news is, though, we're here. And we can understand economics, and we can understand what capitalism actually is, and we can learn. And we love to trade with each other, us human folks. But the simple fact of the matter is, we can't live without capitalism, even if we call it by another name. It's our default pattern of behavior, and every time we act in contradiction to capitalism, the result is destruction, poverty, suffering, and otherwise generally unpleasant things we don't like, and Joe strangling puppies. So.
Damn
Thanks,
Joe.
But that's my presentation. But by all means, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear anyone who wants to discuss anything further. Just step up to the mic and ask a question if anyone has them, or make a comment. And Joe, thank you for putting me directly after CJ. Come on. But actually, CJ, in all honesty, I want to thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. Again, I'm a big fan of what you do. So.
I guess it's mostly a comment.
the point about economically ostracizing people, it seems like people are more apt to do that with like a faceless company or corporation than like a person. For instance, I do a lot with the local humane society, and there's this lady who keeps, like, she's got a bunch of dogs that she doesn't take care of, they're like dying, and horses that are eating garbage and things like that. And I was saying at our board meeting, I'm like, they showed pictures, you know, of the conditions and all that. I said, you need to put that on Facebook, because people see this woman and you tell them her name, and they just all laughed. They're like, no, I mean it. But, you know, it was like, I don't know if that's too confrontational because it's a person instead of a faceless organization, you know.
Kind of confrontational for those poor dogs, too.
Yeah.
So, you're right, actually. That little shade of anonymity that people get when they can hide behind a corporate shield or a business entity, right? You know, it's a lot easier for people to say, I hate Walmart, I'm never shopping at Walmart, but they're not going to deny bread to, you know, the greeter guy that's standing there in the doorway. Because that business puts that little wall of anonymity up, it makes it much, much easier to not engage in direct conflict or direct confrontation with people. And I think most people don't like confrontation, except my wife. What's up, Mike?
So what do you think of the correlation between like ostracizing companies and then the government forced like making cases for gay weddings or something like that? It's kind of a similar politically correct ostracizing and a natural one.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, natural ostracism is, I mean, people could be mistaken in doing it. Maybe somebody has slandered another person's reputation and provided incorrect information. I assure you that Joe Cushing is not a puppy strangler, right? I want to clear that up right now. But if I had done that and if I had convinced you people that he was, you're not going to want to interact with him. That type of ostracism, based on my intervention, of course, is, well, really a perverse incentive that I've created, a negative consequence based on misinformation. The natural ostracism of companies, and yeah, in many cases, the government reacts by simply not giving us any alternatives. They establish force-based oligopolies. Yeah, think about if anyone has cable TV at home, right? You know, Time Warner, Comcast. These are the most hated companies on the face of the planet. Their reputation is worse than Congress, like literally. These are things that people vehemently hate, and yet, you know, my UPERS bill comes in the mail every month. I can't stand these bastards. They're horrible. Every time I talk to them, it sucks a part of my soul out, and I live slightly less long because of it. But there's an oligopoly there. There's nobody else providing it. Well, that's not true anymore. Because now, through a little bit of capital acquisition and innovation and technological advance, we can actually cut that cable, and we can still get all the viewing content that we really want, and we can limit it only to that which we want to see. That's the market at work. Did I actually answer the question? Mike is gone, so I don't know.
Oh, that's the question.
Was that your answer? All right. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you for your time. I'm glad you had me here.